Phil. That's Sarah. We're Ona SLC is the name, and we enjoy making videos for you guys to use as creative tools to explore different themes. Today, we will both be telling you a little bit about ourselves and our early struggles as people in this ever-expanding community of people in recovery. When I was first coming up as a newly sober person, 1 month in I was diagnosed with, well, let me just tell you a quick story. I got sober December 6, 2015 is my sobriety date, and December 26th, the day after Christmas, I was at lunch with my cousin named Andrea, a very loud, sometimes abrasive young lady, but very cool. Red hair. She kind of looks like, oh, look. Kind of looks like her. That wasn't planned, just so you know. I looked over and there's Andrea. Anyway, we're sitting there at Noodles and Company on Fort Union. And she goes, "What the fuck's wrong with your face?" And I was like, whoa. And she goes, "No, seriously, like half of your face isn't working." And I was like, whoa, and I started like paying attention and noticing. And yeah, my face stopped working, my left side. And we finished, took her home, or wherever she was at, and I was like, something was telling me I should go talk to my mom, because she's like a nurse and shit. And so I went over there and showed her, and she's like, "Dude, you could be having a stroke. You should probably go to the hospital." I was like, "Nah, I'm good." She's like, "Seriously?" It's like, "Fine." So she took me to Instacare. And they're like, "We can't handle that here. We think it's Bell's palsy. You need to go to the hospital." And I went to the hospital, and they diagnosed me with Bell's palsy. Now, at the time, for whatever reason, I thought it was something that would last maybe a day or two. And come to find out, it's something that can last from 6 months to a year or two, or even permanent. And so I was going to lots of meetings up until that point, and it was a struggle. I mean, it was 20 days into sobriety, coming off some stuff, and so that was an added thing. So now I had half my face didn't work. I couldn't close my eyes. Still have a hard time with it. And now I got to show up to meetings and show my face, and this is before COVID, so I couldn't wear a mask, didn't have the excuse to get on Zoom or whatever. And, I really wanted to be sober. And so one of the things that the guy that I asked to sponsor me was all about was service. And so he really pushed me hard to show up and be of service. And I swear that if I didn't have obligations to be of service at these meetings and stuff, it would have been a lot harder for me. I don't know if I'd be sober. And I learned a lot about how important service was to me. Because it was good for others, but it made it so I had to show up, and I had to show up to something and be accountable. And so that was kind of my first introduction into the power of service, the power of meetings, because if meetings weren't there, then I wouldn't have gone to be of service to the meeting. So it's just kind of interesting how played out things in recovery can seem. I mean, even before I started telling the story, I didn't know I was going to tell this story, and I didn't know that service was going to come out of it. But before I'm kind of burnt out on typical 12-step shit, and so it's useful to me to remember that the little things are the things that kept me sober and the things that kept me going. And eventually the Bell's palsy went away. I mean, it's probably 90% gone now. But if I didn't have those I became part of a committee that organized events. If I didn't have that committee to show up to, if I didn't have a reason to show up to it, I wouldn't have showed up anywhere because I was very self-conscious about my face. And so, if you're a person that has a disability or some sort of thing, like, that really helped me, and maybe you could use that to find some inspiration or something. I don't know. I'm not really here to inspire necessarily, but I think that's maybe an important point is, even though I felt awkward and I felt outcasted, I mean, of course, these are all things that I made up probably, showing up to things really and being involved in the community really helped me get through that disability period of time. So, what do you think about that?
What do I think about that? Well, I was actually putting myself in these guys' shoes and thinking, I wonder what it would be like to be at Odyssey House, and you're like, okay, we're going to go to this group, and then they turn on this video, and this guy tells a story, and you're like, what? What is this about? What is this story about? But then the story just kind of takes you away, and it doesn't really matter. So hopefully you guys were able to hear that story. Like Phil said, he's Phil, and I'm Sarah. And we are the Own It SLC. And it's funny to say we are Own It SLC because really Own It SLC is a lot of things. It's a podcast, it's a recording studio, it's a live show. But we made it mostly. And so the reason that we're here and the reason why Phil told you a story is that every month we record a video and invite you guys to participate with us in some creative writing. And it doesn't have to be writing, it usually is writing, but if you're somebody who is a visual artist and you want to put some time into it, expressing in some way that's other than words, you're welcome to do that. Writing is just the easiest way for us to do art with you guys when we're not there. And so we were sitting here and we were like, well, what are we going to talk about? And I was like, well, let's put ourselves in their shoes. Like what's it like in your first 30 days? Like, let's just ask them to tell us a story about their first 30 days. And so I said, well, maybe, Phil, maybe you can tell them a story about your first 30 days. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that was Phil's story about his first 30 days. And as you were telling your story, I was thinking there are many ways to construct a story. And since this class is kind of about creativity, I was like noticing the different ways that you were putting your story together. And so one way to tell a story is dialogue. And you did that. You started out with some dialogue between like yourself and Strawberry Shortcake. And Strawberry Shortcake was like, what the fuck is wrong with your face? And so that's one way. Dialogue is like a conversation between two people. Another way is timeline. Timeline is like, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. If you ask me, that's actually one of the more boring ways to tell a story because it can kind of really like drone on, and I don't like storytelling in that way. But if you want to do it, you can. I'm just saying, I might be bored.
Well, it's probably the easiest way to do it because you can just...
Well, it's the least creative.
You can recall it.
I would say it's the least creative way, though, because you're like, okay, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But another way to tell a story is by sensory information. So it's not really about time. It's more about, here's where I was. So, like, the setting. Like, for example, right now I'm sitting in my bedroom, and I'm sitting on my bed, and there are green plants. This thing records backwards, so I'm confused about where I am. There are all of my plants. Green foliage everywhere. And a giant whiteboard so that I can remember the stuff that I gotta do today because I'm scatterbrained. and I have a million ideas, and if I don't write them down, then they just float on down the river of my mind, and I don't ever do it. These are things that are very telling about the story of me, but it's not really about a timeline, it's just about the space. So you can use setting, you can use sensory information where you drop into what do I see, taste, smell, touch, hear. So you use your senses to describe an experience. As you were talking, I had a couple of other ones. You can use poetry. You can use poetry to tell a story. So where you're not necessarily talking in complete sentences and you're more just trying to kind of like capture the essence of something. So you can use poetry. You can actually use a song. We've had people write songs before from Odyssey House, from some of our videos. So maybe you want to tell a story using song. So those are a couple of possibilities. Timeline, sensory information, dialogue, poetry, song. You can actually start in the beginning of the story. Like you can kind of chop time up and do it that way. So you could actually start telling the story from the end. And you could tell us, like, for example, I've been sober for 17 years. And then you go backwards and you tell how that happened. And so a story for me is, like, that's actually true. I've been sober for 17 years. I have a white 2018 Chevy Cruze in my driveway. It's not the nicest car in the world, but it's probably the only car that I've ever like gone to a dealership and actually bought myself. I bought this car on Halloween night in 2018. My kids were in their Halloween costumes, waiting to go trick-or-treating, and I'm at the dealership like signing all of these papers, and they actually, Pepper and Beckham are my kids, they actually found a dead bird in the parking lot of the car dealership, and they had a stick, and they were like flinging the dead bird like up into the air and like trying to catch it with the stick. And so I was kind of embarrassed because my kids were playing with this dead bird, and when are we gonna go trick-or-treating? Anyway, rewind 17 years ago. I didn't have a car because before I got sober, I was working as a food runner for P.F. Chang's China Bistro downtown Salt Lake City on 300 South. And it was really hard to find a parking place in downtown to go to work. So I would just park wherever the hell I wanted and get a parking ticket. And then I would walk out to my car at the end of my shift at like midnight or whatever, and I would want to go to the bar. So I would just shove the parking ticket into my glove box. And I had a lot of parking tickets in my glove box. So actually right after I got sober, my car got impounded for unpaid parking tickets. And so I didn't have a car for a little while when I was first going to meetings. And I used to ride I have this little pink 10-speed, and I used to ride my bike everywhere. And I'd ride my bike to meetings. My daughter Sophie was 2 years old, and I had one of those little chariots that you see people put their toddlers in, and they like tow it behind their bike. And so I would put Sophie in the little chariot, and she had this little helmet, this little like pink and purple flowered helmet, and I put her in the chariot, and I would ride my bike to the meeting. And the reason that I thought of that story actually came from listening to Phil, because I was thinking, it's actually it's a strength building experience to have things that are hard and have to work through the things that are hard to have something to overcome. Like, it wouldn't necessarily have been better if Phil hadn't had Bell's palsy or if I hadn't had my car impounded, because what we both got to find out about ourselves was just how much we really were willing to put into our early recovery, to put into that first 30 days. And like, even though I have to ride my bike, or even though like I'm sure that was really difficult to like meet people and half of your face won't move. but to have to do it anyway, I think is not necessarily a bad thing. Like those difficulties, that resistance, it can either become a strength building element, or it can become an excuse, like an excuse for why I can't. And so I could have definitely used that as an excuse, and I'm sure perhaps you've used that excuse, or you've heard somebody else like, oh, I can't, go wherever because I don't have a car. You probably don't hear that excuse as often. I can't go to meetings because I have Bell's palsy. But you could have used it if you wanted to, but you didn't. And so perhaps as you've been listening to Phil's story and to my story, you thought of a story of your own.
Mm-hmm.
I really love how contagious art is, and how storytelling, it like sparks something. Like you hear somebody's story and you're like, oh, and it gets you thinking about your own stories. The end, so to bring the two pieces of mine together, I have a car now, and it's cool because my loan started out as a significant amount of money for me, and it'll probably be paid off in the next, like when I get my next tax return, so like February. So that's a pretty big deal. Like I went from like not being able to really have my shit together to like being able to pay off a $24,000 loan in 4 years. That's cool. I did that. And I had to there was a lot of resistance to my being able to do that. A tree fell in my car, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Not long ago. A tree fell in my car and I had to have the whole engine replaced. But, we figured it out. So the prompt, the invitation, is using dialogue, timeline, sensory information, poetry, song. Tell us a story about your first 30 days. Tell us about something that you had to overcome. And I really want to invite you to tell that story in a creative way, in a way that you've never told it. So see if you can look at it from a different perspective. Perhaps it's a story that you've told before, but tell us the story in a way that you've never told it.
Sorry, that was a fly. I would also suggest that if you're trying something new, you could try to incorporate all those things. And it sounds like a lot, but it's a cheat code. Because if you're trying to do a poem, right? And you're like, shit, I'm stuck. And you can be like, well, what does it smell? And so you can kind of jump around. Oh, well, where was I? Okay, I can tell a little bit of timeline right here because it'll jump me back into where I need to be. And so I've actually learned that from Sarah is if I'm stuck, all I have to do is think about the sensories. So what did it smell like? What did it taste like? What music was I listening to during this time? And then you can talk about something that's concrete and factual, and then you can move on from there. So, try to do something different with it, and if all else fails, just be yourself, and do it however you want to do it. We always offer. These are merely suggestions. They're meant to kind of spark, to kind of get something moving in you and moving around. We're not grading it. We're not turning it in. We're not writing notes about it or any of that shit. And we like to reiterate that because of how much of treatment actually has to do with note taking and reporting and all that stuff. So this is not that.
No, we're not therapists, and we're not keeping track of anything that you say. So we're just here to encourage creativity because it's been a useful tool in the recovery of both of us. Mm-hmm. And so we're here to share that with you. And so the suggestion is use some of those little tools that we mentioned. I'll say them one more time so that you can have them in your head. Dialogue, timeline, sensory information, poetry, song. I think I also said setting. I think you can describe the setting for us. So use a couple of those tools and tell us a story about your first 30 days. And if you want to, you can kind of do what we did. I feel like both Phil and I kind of threw what is it, like a lesson in there, like, okay, so here's the story, and like what I learned was this, or like what the story means to me is this. And then when we see you on Friday, what we get to do is we just get to hear your stories. So we get to say hi, we get to be on Zoom, we get to clap for each other, we get to feel inspired or laugh or whatever. We get to kind of like egg each other on, but not too much, because you don't have to necessarily read what you wrote. I want to make that clear. Like, I know you guys encourage each other to step out of your comfort zone, but really this is like, this writing and this like expression is just for you. And then if you want to share it, then we'll be stoked to hear it, but we're not going to make you do that, because it's scary. It's really scary to read something that you wrote out loud.
Yeah, and sometimes it's cathartic.
Cathartic.
Thank you. Enough to just write something that's scary. You don't have to share it. So we acknowledge that as well. Yeah, and we'll see you on Friday.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll show you a couple pictures of our portable recording studio named Harvey, and we'll tell you, we can answer your questions about the Own It shows or anything else that we do. But we're here to empower the artists and encourage you guys to be creative, because somebody's got to do it.
And
so here we are.
We like doing it. And even if you're not an artist, we're here to empower you as well.
Mm-hmm.
So have a great day.
We'll see you soon. Did it stop? No, it didn't. It's still recording.